She risked her life to treat a wounded enemy and left a note that said, "Forgive me." The roar of cannons, the chilling whistle of falling bombs, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to the air. These are the indelible sensory markers of war. We often visualize conflict through its sheer brutality, the stark lines drawn between us and them, the dehumanization that allows one person to inflict unimaginable suffering upon another. It's a landscape painted in shades of gray and black, where survival is the only creed and empathy a forgotten luxury. Yet, beneath the surface of this brutal theater, something else, something profoundly human, persistently flickered. This is the story of those flickers, the unexpected embers of kindness that glowed in the heart of the inferno, proving that even in the deepest darkness, the capacity for grace and connection could not be entirely extinguished. We are not here to recount the grand strategies or the devastating losses, though they form the inescapable backdrop. Instead, we turn our gaze to the quiet moments, the brief interludes where the rigid boundaries of enmity dissolved, replaced by a shared recognition of common humanity. Imagine a battlefield, not as a chessboard of strategic maneuvers, but as a raw, visceral space where fear is a constant companion and every shadow might conceal a threat. In the midst of such a harrowing reality, a soldier, sworn enemy to another, finds himself face to face with an opponent who has fallen. This is not a moment of triumph, but a stark confrontation with the sheer vulnerability of another human being. The instinct for self-preservation, the ingrained hatred of the adversary, battles with something far older and more fundamental, the innate impulse to alleviate suffering. What happens in that fleeting instant? Does the ingrained script of war dictate the outcome, or does a deeper, more ancient human code prevail? This is the territory we explore, the uncharted emotional landscape where the lines between aggressor and protector blur, and where the act of reaching out becomes a profound statement of defiance against the very nature of conflict. Our journey takes us to the heart of the Second World War, a conflict that consumed the globe and etched itself into the collective memory of generations. It was an era of unprecedented destruction, of ideologies clashing with brutal force, and of unimaginable suffering inflicted on millions. Yet within this maelstrom, stories emerged, whispers of individuals who, against all odds, chose a different path. They are the quiet rebels, the ones who saw not an enemy uniform, but a fellow human being in pain. These are the tales that often go untold, overshadowed by the thunder of tanks and the pronouncements of leaders. They are not the stories of victory or defeat in the conventional sense, but victories of the spirit. Moments where the innate goodness of humanity asserted itself, even when logic and survival dictated otherwise. This particular narrative delves into one such extraordinary instance, a story that encapsulates the very essence of our exploration. It centers on a woman, a nurse caught in the maelstrom of war, who faced a stark choice when confronted with a wounded enemy soldier. Her decision, and the actions that followed, offer a powerful testament to the enduring strength of compassion. It's a story that transcends the battlefield, speaking to a universal truth about our shared humanity. We will unfold this narrative not as a dry historical account, but as an emotional and deeply human drama, weaving together the threads of factual events with the universal resonance of empathy, sacrifice, and the unexpected power of forgiveness. The unique angle we bring to this exploration is the focus on the individual act of kindness as a force capable of momentarily transcending the vast, impersonal machinery of war. We are not examining the broad strokes of political reconciliation or the strategic ceasefires that ended hostilities. Instead, we are magnifying the microscopic, yet infinitely significant moments where one human being extended a hand to another, despite the overwhelming pressures and ingrained animosities of their situation. This script aims to reveal that within the darkest hours of human history, the capacity for altruism, for recognizing the inherent worth of another soul, remained a potent, albeit often hidden, force. It's about the quiet courage of compassion, the bravery it takes to act with empathy when the world screams for vengeance. We will traverse the emotional terrain of war, from the suffocating tension of imminent danger to the sudden, breathtaking release of an unexpected act of mercy. Through carefully curated historical accounts, personal testimonies, and evocative storytelling, we will bring these poignant moments to life. This is a journey designed to resonate with you, not just as a historical inquiry, but as a profound reflection on the human condition. We believe that understanding these instances of grace from the past can illuminate our present, reminding us that the potential for kindness, for understanding, and for forgiveness resides within us all, waiting to be awakened, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. This is the promise of our exploration, to uncover the echoes of humanity that persist, resilient and luminous, through the darkest chapters of our shared story. The canvas of the Second World War, vast and harrowing, is often painted with broad strokes of conflict, ideology, and immense suffering. We learn about the battles, the leaders, the geopolitical shifts, and the devastating scale of loss. This is essential history, a necessary understanding of the forces that shaped our modern world. However, within this immense tapestry of destruction, there exist countless threads of quiet resilience, of profound human connection that defied the very logic of war. These are the moments that often escape the grand historical narratives, the intimate gestures of empathy that, for a fleeting instant, dissolved the bitter lines drawn between enemy combatants. This script seeks to illuminate those hidden threads, to bring to the forefront stories of unexpected compassion that bloomed in the most barren landscapes of conflict, proving that the human spirit, in its capacity for kindness and understanding, can indeed endure and even flourish amidst the deepest despair. Our focus is not on the strategies that won wars, nor the ideologies that fueled them, but on the individual choices that affirmed our shared humanity. We are drawn to the instances where the instinct to harm was overridden by an even more potent, ancient impulse, the need to alleviate suffering, to connect, to forgive. These are the moments that offer a profound counterpoint to the prevailing narrative of wartime brutality, reminding us that even in the most extreme circumstances, the capacity for grace, for selfless action, and for recognizing the inherent dignity of another human being could not be entirely extinguished. This exploration is driven by the belief that by highlighting these extraordinary acts of empathy, we can inspire a deeper understanding of our own potential for kindness and resilience. The specific narrative we will unfold is a powerful testament to this enduring spirit. It centers on a woman, a nurse, whose sworn duty was to heal, yet war thrust her into a moral crucible, confronting her with a wounded enemy soldier. Her response, a remarkable act of risking her own safety to provide care, and the poignant message she left behind, encapsulates the very essence of what we aim to explore. This is not just a historical anecdote. It is a deeply emotional and profoundly human story that speaks to the universal capacity for compassion, even when faced with the most dire of circumstances. It's a story that asks us to consider what truly defines us, not in times of peace, but in the crucible of conflict. We will delve into the emotional weight of such decisions, the internal struggle between ingrained duty, fear, and the overwhelming pull of empathy. The narrative will be structured to build suspense, not merely around the physical dangers of war, but around the ethical and emotional dilemmas faced by individuals caught within its grip. We will move from the stark realities of the battlefield to the intimate space of human connection, illustrating how a single act of kindness can ripple outwards, offering a glimpse of hope and redemption. This is a journey into the heart of what it means to be human, even when stripped bare by the brutal realities of war. We aim to show that within the darkest chapters of our history, there exist luminous examples of the enduring power of empathy, a power that transcends enmity and speaks to the core of our shared existence. The objective is to create an immersive, emotionally resonant experience that transcends mere historical recounting. We want to engage you, not just with facts, but with feelings. The story of the nurse and the wounded soldier serves as a powerful anchor, a tangible example of the abstract concepts of empathy and forgiveness in action. It is a story that begs to be told, not just for its historical significance, but for its timeless relevance to the human condition. We will unravel it with a tone that is both cinematic and deeply personal, drawing you into the emotional landscape of the era and the individuals who lived through it. This script is an invitation to look beyond the uniforms and the flags, to see the shared humanity that persists even when nations are at war. It's an exploration of how, in the face of unimaginable horror, individuals chose to embody the best of what we can be. The narrative will unfold with a carefully balanced rhythm, alternating between the gripping tension of wartime realities and the profound relief and inspiration found in acts of selfless kindness. We are charting a course through the paradox of war, a time of systematic dehumanization, yet a period that also, paradoxically, revealed the extraordinary depths of human compassion. This is our promise, to deliver a narrative that is not only informative and historically grounded, but also deeply moving and ultimately inspiring. The Second World War serves as a stark and potent backdrop for this exploration, a conflict so vast and all-encompassing that it often overshadows the individual human stories that played out within its brutal sweep. We tend to think of war in terms of grand narratives, the rise and fall of nations, the clash of ideologies, the immense scale of destruction. Yet, beneath this monumental surface, a different kind of story was being written, one in smaller, more intimate strokes, a narrative woven from individual choices, unexpected acts of grace, and the enduring flicker of human connection in the face of overwhelming animosity. This script aims to bring those often unseen stories to the fore, focusing on the profound moments of empathy and compassion that arose between enemies, proving that even in the heart of the inferno, the embers of humanity could not be entirely extinguished. Our particular angle is to move beyond the statistics of war and delve into the emotional and ethical paradoxes it presents. We are not here to debate the causes or consequences of the conflict on a geopolitical scale. Instead, we are drawn to the micro-level interactions, the fleeting moments where the rigid boundaries of enmity dissolved, replaced by a shared recognition of vulnerability and common humanity. The story of a nurse risking her life to treat a wounded enemy soldier, leaving behind a note that pleads for forgiveness, is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a potent symbol of this paradox. It encapsulates the tension between the brutal imperatives of war and the innate human capacity for kindness, sacrifice, and ultimately, redemption. This script is designed to be an emotional and historical journey, a hybrid that allows us to experience the raw reality of war, while simultaneously being uplifted by the extraordinary examples of grace that emerged from it. We will build a narrative arc that moves from the palpable tension and fear of the battlefield to the profound emotional release and hope inspired by these acts of compassion. The aim is to create a deeply engaging experience that resonates with the viewer on a personal level, reminding them of the enduring power of empathy, even in the darkest of times. We are not just recounting history. We are exploring the very essence of what it means to be human when pushed to the absolute limits. The language and tone will be carefully crafted to reflect this duality, to convey the harsh realities of war with unflinching honesty, while simultaneously imbuing the moments of compassion with a poetic and inspiring resonance. We want to evoke vivid imagery, to allow the audience to feel the chill of fear and the warmth of a shared human moment. This is a story about survival, yes, but more importantly, it is a story about the enduring spirit, about the choices individuals made that affirmed their humanity when the world around them seemed determined to strip it away. We will weave together factual accounts with universal themes, creating a narrative that is both historically grounded and deeply moving. The central question that drives this exploration is simple, yet profound. In the midst of organized violence and systematic dehumanization, how and why did acts of profound empathy and forgiveness occur? What does this tell us about the enduring nature of the human spirit? The story of the nurse and the wounded soldier provides a compelling case study, a lens through which we can examine these fundamental questions. It's a narrative that promises to hold the audience captive, not through the spectacle of battle, but through the quiet, powerful drama of the human heart. This is an invitation to witness the echoes of humanity, to find hope in the unexpected, and to be reminded that even in the most harrowing of circumstances, kindness can and does survive. The stark reality of the front lines was not merely a matter of physical proximity to danger. It was an immersion into a psychological crucible where the very definition of humanity was tested. Beyond the immediate threat of bullets and artillery, soldiers grappled with a profound internal conflict. The constant exposure to violence, the witnessing of suffering, and the imperative to dehumanize the enemy. All these pressures warped the psychological landscape. This created a fertile ground for the emergence of what psychologists term moral disengagement, a process where individuals rationalize harmful actions, diffuse responsibility, and minimize the consequences of their behavior. It's a survival mechanism, albeit a destructive one, that allows individuals to function in environments that would otherwise be psychologically unbearable. Yet, it is precisely within this context of pervasive moral disengagement that the spontaneous acts of compassion we are exploring become so extraordinarily significant. They represent a powerful countercurrent, a conscious or subconscious rejection of this psychological armor, a reassertion of innate ethical principles, even when every external factor suggested otherwise. Consider the scientific underpinnings of this phenomenon. Evolutionary psychology suggests that humans possess an innate capacity for altruism, a predisposition to care for others, particularly those within their in-group. This kin selection and reciprocal altruism are deeply ingrained. However, war fundamentally challenges these evolutionary imperatives by artificially expanding the concept of the enemy and suppressing the recognition of shared humanity. The propaganda machinery of warring nations often work to paint the adversary as inherently evil, subhuman, or a threat to one's very existence, thereby negating the biological and social mechanisms that foster empathy. Consequently, an act of kindness towards an enemy soldier wasn't merely a deviation from the norm, it was a profound disruption of this carefully constructed psychological framework, a defiance of the very principles that enabled large-scale warfare to persist. Furthermore, the isolation inherent in many combat scenarios amplified these psychological pressures. Soldiers were often cut off from their usual social support systems and ethical frameworks, relying instead on the immediate dynamics of their unit. In such environments, group cohesion and loyalty could easily morph into an unquestioning adherence to the group's norms, even if those norms involved brutality. Therefore, an individual who chose to act with compassion towards an enemy was not only defying the external enemy, but also potentially risking ostracization or worse from their own comrades. This dual pressure, the external enemy and the internal group dynamics, underscores the immense courage required for such acts. It wasn't simply a matter of momentary pity. It was often a calculated risk, a deliberate choice to prioritize a higher moral principle over immediate personal safety and social acceptance within their own ranks. Now, let's examine a specific facet of this psychological interplay, the role of shared experience. Even amidst hostility, soldiers on opposing sides often found themselves enduring remarkably similar conditions. They faced the same biting cold, the same gnawing hunger, the same crushing exhaustion, and the same pervasive fear of death. This shared suffering, though experienced from opposing perspectives, could create an unexpected, albeit fragile, bridge of understanding. Imagine a brief lull in fighting, a moment of quiet where the sounds of battle recede. In such a pause, a soldier might observe an enemy counterpart struggling with a task, perhaps attempting to light a damp fire or share a meager ration with a fallen comrade. This observation, devoid of the immediate threat of combat, could trigger a flicker of recognition. They too are suffering. They too are human. This visceral understanding, born from shared hardship, could then pave the way for an act of spontaneous assistance, an unsolicited gesture that bypasses the political and ideological divides. Conversely, the absence of this shared experience, or the effective suppression of its recognition through propaganda, often solidified the dehumanization. When soldiers were conditioned to see their enemies only as faceless, abstract threats, the possibility for empathy diminished drastically. The narrative was one of us versus them, with little room for nuance or shared humanity. Therefore, the instances where empathy prevailed were often those where this carefully constructed otherness was momentarily breached, allowing the underlying shared human condition to surface. The story of the nurse, for instance, likely involved a moment where the soldier was not an active combatant, but a vulnerable, suffering individual, stripping away the enemy label and revealing the raw human beneath. This shift in perception is critical. It's the moment the psychological defenses crumble, allowing compassion to surface. The effectiveness of such acts lies in their ability to momentarily dismantle the psychological barriers erected by war, showcasing the resilience of our most fundamental human impulses. The very act of extending aid to an enemy often triggered profound internal shifts within the giver, extending far beyond the immediate wartime context. Consider the psychological aftermath for individuals who performed such acts. It wasn't merely a temporary lapse in wartime aggression, it could represent a fundamental reorientation of their moral compass. For many, the experience served as a stark confrontation with the arbitrary nature of enmity, a realization that the lines drawn between combatants were often superficial, masking a shared vulnerability. This encounter with the other, as a fellow human being, could plant seeds of doubt about the prevailing narratives of hatred and justify their actions. Consequently, upon returning to civilian life, these individuals often carried a unique perspective, one marked by a heightened awareness of the costs of conflict and a deeper appreciation for the fragility of peace. Their experiences, though perhaps not openly discussed, could subtly influence their interactions, fostering a greater inclination towards understanding and reconciliation in their personal lives. Building on this, the ripple effect of such gestures extended outwards, often in ways unforeseen by the individuals themselves. While the immediate recipient of the kindness might have been a single wounded soldier, the act itself could subtly undermine the pervasive atmosphere of animosity. Imagine the impact on fellow soldiers witnessing such an act. While some might react with condemnation or suspicion, others might experience a moment of cognitive dissonance, a questioning of their own hardened stance. This internal conflict, even if not overtly expressed, represents a crack in the monolithic edifice of wartime hatred. Such moments, though rare, could serve as powerful counter-narratives, whispering that the prescribed path of enmity was not the only option. This subtle erosion of ingrained hostility, even on a small scale, contributed to a more complex emotional reality on the ground, a reality often obscured by official accounts of unified aggression. Furthermore, the documentation of these events, through letters, diaries, or later testimonies, provides invaluable insights into the ethical complexities of warfare. These personal accounts offer a stark contrast to the often sanitized or overly dramatized official histories. They reveal the messy, contradictory, and deeply human experiences of individuals caught in extraordinary circumstances. For instance, a soldier might write about sharing cigarettes with an enemy prisoner not out of genuine affection, but out of a shared weariness, a momentary truce in the larger conflict. This nuanced portrayal highlights that compassion in war often doesn't manifest as grand pronouncements of peace, but as small, pragmatic acts of shared humanity that acknowledge the burden of existence for all involved, regardless of uniform. Analyzing these subtleties allows us to appreciate the diverse forms that empathy can take under duress. Conversely, the very existence of such profound acts of kindness serves as a crucial reminder of the ethical frameworks that persist even when seemingly overwhelmed by conflict. While war incentivizes and often necessitates the suppression of certain moral impulses, it does not entirely eradicate them. The innate human capacity for empathy, for recognizing suffering and feeling a desire to alleviate it, remains a powerful undercurrent. The nurse's note, "Forgive me," is particularly poignant because it acknowledges the transgression of wartime norms. It reveals an awareness that her act, while morally commendable in a broader human sense, was still a breach of the prevailing wartime ethos. This self-awareness underscores that even in the act of defying enemy status, there was an understanding of the complex moral landscape they were navigating. It's this intricate interplay between adherence to wartime imperatives and the persistent pull of universal ethics that makes these stories so compelling and instructive. The psychological impact of witnessing or participating in acts of empathy during wartime extends to the very fabric of an individual's moral identity. It's not merely about a single decision, but about the subsequent reevaluation of one's place in the world and the nature of conflict itself. For those who extended kindness, the act could serve as a powerful catalyst for introspection, prompting a deeper understanding of ethical responsibility that transcended battlefield directives. This wasn't about absolving oneself of wartime actions, but about acknowledging a capacity for something beyond the prescribed roles of soldier or victim. It was a recognition that the inherent dignity of another person, even an adversary, held a weight that could, and sometimes did, supersede the immediate demands of war. Consequently, such experiences often fostered a lifelong commitment to peace and understanding, manifesting in post-war advocacy or simply in a more nuanced approach to interpersonal relationships. Furthermore, the very act of documenting these encounters, whether through personal journals or later interviews, played a critical role in preserving these counter-narratives. These personal accounts offered a vital counterweight to the prevailing rhetoric of absolute enmity. When a soldier wrote about sharing a clandestine moment of respite with a captured enemy, or a nurse risked censure to tend to a wounded foe, these narratives, however small, challenged the monolithic portrayal of war as a purely destructive force. They highlighted the persistent presence of human agency, the ability of individuals to carve out spaces for compassion, even within the most oppressive systems. This preservation of individual experience is crucial for a holistic understanding of history, preventing the narrative from being solely defined by official pronouncements and military outcomes. Consider the profound implications for the recipients of such kindness. For a soldier, grievously wounded and facing imminent death, the unexpected touch of a compassionate hand, the offer of sustenance, or even a moment of shared silence with someone sworn to kill them, could be profoundly transformative. It offered a lifeline not just to physical survival, but to a sense of enduring humanity. This brief, potent connection could serve as a powerful antidote to the dehumanizing effects of combat, reminding them that even in their most vulnerable state, they were recognized as a fellow human being. Such experiences, while perhaps fleeting, could leave an indelible mark, influencing their outlook on life and their perception of the enemy long after the conflict ceased. Another crucial layer to consider is the inherent risk involved. These acts were rarely performed in a vacuum. There was always the potential for discovery by one's own side, leading to severe repercussions, ranging from imprisonment to execution. This element of personal danger elevates these gestures from mere acts of pity to profound demonstrations of moral courage. It speaks to a deeply held conviction, a willingness to face severe personal consequences for the sake of upholding a higher ethical principle. This courage wasn't necessarily born of a grand philosophical conviction, but often from an immediate, visceral recognition of shared suffering and an instinctive revulsion at gratuitous cruelty. The stories we uncover are often those where this courage, this willingness to defy the prevailing norms, ultimately overshadowed the primal instinct for self-preservation. It's in these moments of defiance, in the face of overwhelming odds, that the true resilience of the human spirit is most vividly illuminated. The enduring impact of these acts of empathy can be understood through the lens of cognitive dissonance reduction. When an individual's actions, offering aid to an enemy, clash with their pre-existing beliefs or societal expectations of wartime hostility, a state of discomfort arises. To alleviate this internal friction, the individual may unconsciously adjust their beliefs, perhaps by re-evaluating the enemy's humanity or the justification for the conflict itself. This internal recalibration, however subtle, can have profound implications for their post-war outlook. For instance, a soldier who found himself sharing a clandestine moment of warmth with a captured adversary might, upon returning home, find it increasingly difficult to accept simplistic narratives of nationalistic fervor or justified aggression. Their personal experience becomes a powerful, albeit often unspoken, counterpoint to the prevailing public discourse. This internal shift, driven by the need to reconcile contradictory experiences, can foster a more nuanced and compassionate worldview, influencing their engagement with societal issues and their interpersonal relationships for years to come. Furthermore, the very act of bearing witness to such compassionate gestures can subtly alter the collective memory of conflict. While official histories often emphasize grand strategic maneuvers and decisive victories, these personal anecdotes passed down through families or preserved in archives contribute to a richer, more complex understanding of wartime experiences. They introduce the element of human choice and moral agency into a narrative that can otherwise feel deterministic and overwhelming. Consider how a grandson, hearing a story from his grandfather about a German medic who, despite the chaos, ensured the safe passage of a wounded American soldier, gains a different perspective on the war than one solely gleaned from newsreels depicting relentless destruction. This inherited memory, imbued with the emotional weight of individual acts of grace, can shape subsequent generations' perceptions of historical events and foster a greater appreciation for the complexities of human behavior under duress. The application of these insights extends beyond historical reflection into contemporary conflict resolution and humanitarian aid. Understanding that individuals can transcend enemy lines to offer assistance provides a crucial psychological framework for de-escalation and reconciliation efforts. It demonstrates that even in the most entrenched conflicts, the possibility for human connection remains. For aid workers operating in hostile territories, recognizing and even subtly encouraging these moments of shared humanity can be a vital strategy. By facilitating indirect communication or creating neutral spaces where adversaries might interact without immediate threat, humanitarian organizations can tap into this inherent capacity for empathy, fostering an environment where dialogue and eventual peace become more attainable. This approach moves beyond purely logistical aid to address the psychological underpinnings of conflict, acknowledging that rebuilding trust often begins with small, person-to-person interactions. Conversely, the scarcity of such documented acts underscores the immense psychological barriers erected by warfare. The fact that these stories are often exceptional, requiring extraordinary courage and occurring against a backdrop of pervasive hostility, highlights the effectiveness of the dehumanization processes inherent in armed conflict. When societal structures and propaganda actively work to strip the enemy of their humanity, the impulse to extend compassion becomes a radical act. This is not to diminish the significance of these moments, but to understand the immense effort required to overcome the ingrained psychological mechanisms that fuel prolonged warfare. The rarity of these profound deviations from the norm is, in itself, a testament to the powerful grip of wartime conditioning. Another crucial layer to consider is the role of the observer effect in these interactions. The presence of witnesses, whether fellow soldiers or civilians, can significantly influence the likelihood and nature of compassionate acts. While some witnesses might condemn such actions, others might be inspired to emulate them, creating a nascent culture of kindness within a specific unit or community, however small and localized. The knowledge that such behavior, though risky, is not entirely isolated can provide a psychological buffer against the pervasive negativity of war. It suggests that human beings, even when immersed in violence, are susceptible to observing and adopting pro-social behaviors, provided there is some degree of reinforcement or at least tolerance for such actions. This dynamic highlights the interconnectedness of individual choices within a group setting and the potential for positive contagion, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. The profound philosophical implications of these wartime acts of empathy resonate deeply when we consider the concept of moral agency in extremis. It challenges the deterministic view that individuals are merely products of their environment, utterly subservient to the pressures of war. Instead, these instances reveal a persistent human capacity for independent ethical judgment, a core of personal responsibility that can, at critical junctures, assert itself against overwhelming external forces. Think of the inherent existentialist notion that even in the most constrained situations, individuals retain the freedom to choose their response. The nurse, facing a wounded enemy, wasn't merely reacting. She was making a deliberate, value-laden choice. This act of choosing compassion, often at significant personal risk, underscores the profound truth that our actions, even in the most dire circumstances, define who we are. It's a powerful affirmation that human beings are not simply cogs in the machinery of conflict, but possess an irreducible moral core. Consider how this idea manifests in the aftermath of conflict. The individuals who performed these acts often carried a unique understanding of the human cost of war, an understanding forged in the crucible of direct personal experience that transcended ideological divides. This lived understanding could translate into a more profound commitment to peace and reconciliation than might be found in those who only experienced war through official narratives or distant observation. For example, a returning soldier who had shared a moment of quiet humanity with an enemy might find it difficult to participate in jingoistic rhetoric or to demonize entire populations. Their personal encounter serves as a constant internal reminder of the shared humanity that lies beneath the surface of nationalistic fervor. This deeply personal ethical grounding can become a powerful, albeit often quiet, force for fostering understanding and preventing future conflicts. Furthermore, the very act of documenting these moments, whether through letters, diaries, or later oral histories, serves a crucial function in shaping collective memory. While grand narratives of victory and defeat dominate historical accounts, these intimate testimonies introduce a vital counter-narrative of individual resilience and moral choice. They remind us that history is not solely the domain of leaders and armies, but is also shaped by the quiet decisions of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. Imagine a family preserving a letter from a grandfather describing how a Russian soldier offered him a portion of his meager rations during a brutal winter campaign. This single anecdote, imbued with the warmth of human connection amidst icy despair, can offer a more nuanced and ultimately more hopeful perspective on the conflict than any casualty report. It humanizes the past, preventing it from becoming a monolithic story of suffering and destruction. This perspective also offers critical insights for contemporary humanitarian efforts. When aid workers or diplomats engage in conflict zones, understanding that moments of empathy can, and do, occur even between bitter adversaries is paramount. It suggests that opportunities for dialogue and de-escalation might exist in unexpected places. For instance, identifying individuals within warring factions who have demonstrated a capacity for compassion, perhaps through prior interactions or observed behavior, could be a strategic advantage in building trust and facilitating negotiations. It acknowledges that even within the most entrenched conflicts, there are individuals who retain a connection to a shared humanity, and these individuals can serve as vital bridges towards resolution. This approach recognizes that peace-building is not solely about grand political gestures, but also about nurturing the small, persistent embers of human connection. Conversely, the profound ethical challenges posed by these acts cannot be overstated. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the lines between good and evil can become blurred in the chaos of war. The nurse who aided the enemy, while acting with immense compassion, was still operating within a context where her nation was at war. This raises complex questions about loyalty, duty, and the ultimate moral justification of actions that defy the prevailing wartime ethos. It compels us to consider whether a higher moral law, one that transcends national allegiances and wartime imperatives, should guide our actions. These are not easy questions, and the very existence of these wartime dilemmas highlights the enduring complexity of human morality when faced with the ultimate test of conflict. The long-term psychological ramifications for individuals who engaged in acts of wartime empathy offer a compelling area for examination, distinct from the immediate moral quandaries. Following the cessation of hostilities, many of these individuals found themselves grappling with a unique form of internal dissonance. Their wartime experiences, particularly those involving cross-enemy kindness, often rendered them somewhat alienated from the prevailing post-war narratives of unadulterated victory and righteous indignation. Imagine a veteran who, having shared a clandestine moment of respite with a German soldier during a tense lull, now finds himself swept up in nationalistic celebrations. This internal disconnect, the chasm between his lived reality of shared humanity and the public narrative of absolute enmity, could lead to a quiet, persistent sense of isolation. This wasn't about regret for their actions, but about the difficulty of integrating these profound, contradictory experiences into a coherent self-identity within a society eager to categorize the war into simple terms of good versus evil. Furthermore, the very nature of these compassionate acts often involved a degree of secrecy. The risks associated with being discovered by one's own side meant that these moments were frequently solitary, unacknowledged, and uncelebrated. Consequently, the internal processing of these experiences became a deeply personal journey. Unlike soldiers celebrated for battlefield bravery, those who extended kindness to the enemy often carried their stories in silence, their profound moral courage unremarked upon by the wider world. This lack of external validation could further complicate their reintegration into civilian life. Consider the psychological weight of knowing you performed an act of profound moral significance, yet being unable to share it, or worse, fearing the negative judgment if it were revealed. This internal burden, the solitary stewardship of such impactful memories, represents a distinct challenge faced by these individuals, diverging from the more commonly understood traumas of combat. Building on this, the impact on their subsequent relationships warrants exploration. Individuals who demonstrated such a strong capacity for empathy during wartime often exhibited a heightened sensitivity to injustice and suffering in their post-war lives. They might become more inclined towards community service, advocacy for peace, or simply demonstrate a more patient and understanding approach in their personal interactions. Think of a former medic who, having risked disciplinary action to treat an enemy combatant, later dedicates their life to a career in social work, instinctively drawn to alleviating suffering wherever they find it. Their wartime experience, rather than hardening them completely, seems to have refined and amplified their innate compassionate tendencies. This suggests that such profound moral choices, even under duress, can act as formative experiences, shaping an individual's ethical trajectory for the remainder of their lives. Conversely, the societal perception and historical recording of these events present a unique hurdle. While acts of battlefield heroism are readily documented and celebrated, moments of compassion towards the enemy are often relegated to the periphery, if recorded at all. This disparity in historical emphasis can lead to a skewed understanding of wartime realities, presenting a narrative of unremitting hostility that overlooks the persistent presence of human decency. For instance, official war histories might meticulously detail troop movements and strategic objectives, but rarely dedicate space to the quiet act of a soldier sharing their last rations with a captured adversary. This selective focus, while perhaps understandable given the sheer scale of conflict, risks obscuring the very elements that might offer the most profound lessons for humanity. Consequently, the individuals who lived these experiences often find their most significant moral contributions largely unacknowledged by the broader historical record, leaving their unique insights largely unshared. Another crucial layer to consider is the potential for these experiences to foster a unique form of existential resilience. Facing the stark reality of one's own mortality and the capacity for immense cruelty in others, yet choosing to act with kindness, can lead to a profound reevaluation of life's meaning. It suggests a deep-seated belief in the value of human connection that transcends the immediate circumstances of conflict. Imagine a pilot who, after a harrowing dogfight, discovers the enemy pilot they engaged has crashed and is injured. If this pilot then takes steps to ensure the downed adversary receives aid, the experience could fundamentally alter their perspective on the nature of conflict and the inherent worth of every individual life. This resilience isn't about forgetting the horrors of war, but about finding meaning and purpose through acts that affirm life and connection even in its darkest moments, providing a distinct psychological fortitude that endures long after the fighting stops. The propagation of empathy, even in its most nascent form between adversaries, can trigger cascading effects that extend far beyond the immediate interaction. When a single act of kindness occurs, it doesn't merely affect the giver and receiver, it can subtly alter the social dynamics of the surrounding environment. Consider a scenario on the Eastern Front where a German soldier, witnessing a Soviet counterpart struggling to retrieve a fallen comrade under fire, deviates from protocol to provide covering fire, allowing the retrieval. This act, observed by others on both sides, introduces a new variable into their perception of the enemy. For the German soldiers, it might spark a flicker of admiration or at least confusion, challenging the monolithic image of the Soviets as implacable foes. For the Soviet soldiers, it could sow a seed of doubt about the absolute malevolence of their enemy. This ripple effect, though often understated and difficult to quantify, can contribute to a gradual, almost imperceptible shift in the psychological climate of the battlefield, potentially making future instances of localized ceasefires or acts of mutual aid more likely. Furthermore, the very documentation of these extraordinary events, often through personal letters or diaries, plays a crucial role in their enduring legacy. These private accounts, unlike official military dispatches, capture the raw, unvarnished emotional truth of wartime experiences. When a soldier writes home about a moment of unexpected solidarity with an enemy, perhaps sharing a cigarette in a brief unspoken truce, they are not only preserving their personal memory, but also contributing to a broader, more nuanced historical record. These narratives serve as vital counterpoints to the pervasive narratives of unrelenting hostility, offering evidence that the human capacity for connection could, and did, persist even under the most extreme pressures. Consequently, these personal testimonies become invaluable resources for understanding the complex emotional landscape of war, providing a humanizing dimension often absent from conventional historical accounts. The application of these insights into fostering reconciliation is significant. Understanding that empathy can transcend the boundaries of conflict suggests that targeted interventions aimed at facilitating brief, non-threatening interactions between opposing groups might yield surprising results. For instance, in post-conflict scenarios, carefully curated cultural exchanges or joint community projects, even those initiated on a small scale, can serve to rebuild trust by exposing individuals to the shared humanity of their former adversaries. Now, consider how this principle might be applied when addressing deeply entrenched societal divisions today. By creating structured opportunities for individuals from opposing factions to collaborate on a common, non-ideological goal, such as rebuilding a shared infrastructure or participating in a joint environmental initiative. This approach leverages the inherent human capacity for cooperation, demonstrating that shared purpose can, over time, erode animosity. Conversely, the psychological mechanisms that facilitate such empathy are often fragile and easily suppressed. The very conditions that define warfare, the constant threat, the pervasive fear, and the systematic dehumanization of the other, actively work against the natural inclination towards compassion. When soldiers are trained to view their adversaries as less than human, as mere targets to be eliminated, the neural pathways associated with empathy are effectively bypassed or deactivated. This is not an innate human failing, but a learned response, a psychological adaptation to the brutal demands of combat. Therefore, the emergence of empathy in such an environment is not merely a deviation. It is a powerful act of resistance against these deeply ingrained psychological conditioning processes, highlighting the extraordinary effort required to reassert one's fundamental humanity. Another crucial layer to consider is the role of storytelling in perpetuating these acts of compassion across generations. The narrative of the nurse who risked everything to treat a wounded enemy, leaving a note pleading for forgiveness, is not just a historical footnote. It's a powerful archetype. When such stories are shared, retold, and preserved, they serve as potent reminders of the enduring strength of the human spirit. They become beacons of hope, illustrating that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for profound kindness and moral courage exists. This continuous retelling reinforces the idea that empathy is not a fleeting emotion, but a fundamental aspect of our shared humanity, a force capable of transcending the artificial divisions created by conflict and offering a pathway towards a more compassionate future. These narratives, in essence, become blueprints for resilient humanity, demonstrating that the echoes of kindness can resonate long after the sounds of war have faded. The psychological impact of witnessing or participating in acts of empathy during wartime extends beyond the immediate combatant, subtly influencing the broader societal narrative and the collective memory of conflict. When stories of compassion between enemies emerge, they act as powerful counter-narratives, challenging the simplistic, often propagandized portrayal of war as an absolute dichotomy of good versus evil. These individual acts, when shared, can introduce nuance into public discourse, fostering a more complex understanding of the human experience during wartime. Consider the impact of a widely circulated photograph, even if staged or misinterpreted, that shows a soldier offering a gesture of kindness to an adversary. Such an image, regardless of its factual accuracy, can plant a seed of doubt about the inherent depravity of the enemy, potentially influencing public opinion and contributing to a less polarized post-war reconciliation process. This isn't about excusing wartime atrocities, but about acknowledging the persistent presence of human complexity, even amidst systemic brutality. Furthermore, the very act of documenting these encounters, whether through personal letters, diaries, or later interviews, plays a critical role in preserving these counter-narratives. These personal accounts offer a stark contrast to the often sanitized or overly dramatized official histories. They reveal the messy, contradictory, and deeply human experiences of individuals caught in extraordinary circumstances. For instance, a soldier might write about sharing cigarettes with an enemy prisoner not out of genuine affection, but out of a shared weariness, a momentary truce in the larger conflict. This nuanced portrayal highlights that compassion in war often doesn't manifest as grand pronouncements of peace, but as small pragmatic acts of shared humanity that acknowledge the burden of existence for all involved, regardless of uniform. Analyzing these subtleties allows us to appreciate the diverse forms that empathy can take under duress. The application of these insights into fostering reconciliation is significant. Understanding that empathy can transcend the boundaries of conflict suggests that targeted interventions aimed at facilitating brief, Non-threatening interactions between opposing groups might yield surprising results. For instance, in post-conflict scenarios, carefully curated cultural exchanges or joint community projects, even those initiated on a small scale, can serve to rebuild trust by exposing individuals to the shared humanity of their former adversaries. Now, consider how this principle might be applied when addressing deeply entrenched societal divisions today. By creating structured opportunities for individuals from opposing factions to collaborate on a common, non-ideological goal, such as rebuilding a shared infrastructure or participating in a joint environmental initiative. This approach leverages the inherent human capacity for cooperation, demonstrating that shared purpose can, over time, erode animosity. Conversely, the psychological mechanisms that facilitate such empathy are often fragile and easily suppressed. The very conditions that define warfare, the constant threat, the pervasive fear, and the systematic dehumanization of the other, actively work against the natural inclination towards compassion. When soldiers are trained to view their adversaries as less than human, as mere targets to be eliminated, the neural pathways associated with empathy are effectively bypassed or deactivated. This is not an innate human failing, but a learned response, a psychological adaptation to the brutal demands of combat. Therefore, the emergence of empathy in such an environment is not merely a deviation. It is a powerful act of resistance against these deeply ingrained psychological conditioning processes, highlighting the extraordinary effort required to reassert one's fundamental humanity. Another crucial layer to consider is the role of storytelling in perpetuating these acts of compassion across generations. The narrative of the nurse who risked everything to treat a wounded enemy, leaving a note pleading for forgiveness, is not just a historical footnote. It's a powerful archetype. When such stories are shared, retold, and preserved, they serve as potent reminders of the enduring strength of the human spirit. They become beacons of hope, illustrating that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for profound kindness and moral courage exists. This continuous retelling reinforces the idea that empathy is not a fleeting emotion, but a fundamental aspect of our shared humanity, a force capable of transcending the artificial divisions created by conflict and offering a pathway towards a more compassionate future. These narratives, in essence, become blueprints for resilient humanity, demonstrating that the echoes of kindness can resonate long after the sounds of war have faded. The psychological burden carried by those who extended kindness across enemy lines often manifested in a profound reevaluation of their own experiences of conflict. Rather than simply recalling acts of violence, these individuals might find themselves dwelling on the fleeting moments of shared humanity, the brief interludes where the rigid boundaries of enmity dissolved. This internal focus could lead to a nuanced understanding of war, one that acknowledged its brutality without reducing every interaction to one of pure antagonism. Consequently, upon returning to civilian life, they might possess a unique perspective, less prone to simplistic generalizations about the enemy and more attuned to the complexities of human motivation. This nuanced view could translate into a greater capacity for forgiveness and understanding in their personal lives, fostering stronger interpersonal bonds and a more inclusive worldview. Furthermore, the very act of surviving such intense moral dilemmas could forge a unique kind of resilience. The knowledge that one has navigated the treacherous ethical landscape of war and chosen a path of compassion, often at personal risk, could instill a deep sense of self-efficacy and moral fortitude. This isn't about pride, but about a quiet confidence derived from having acted in accordance with deeply held values, even when those values were challenged by the surrounding environment. Consider a surgeon who, during a desperate battle, chose to prioritize treating a critically wounded enemy soldier over tending to a less severely injured comrade from their own side, knowing the potential disciplinary repercussions. The internal resolution of that difficult choice, the affirmation of a universal ethical imperative, could provide a bedrock of psychological strength that sustained them through subsequent life challenges, offering a quiet assurance in their own moral compass. The societal impact of preserving these less common narratives is crucial for a balanced historical understanding. While tales of battlefield heroism are readily disseminated, stories of cross-enemy compassion often remain buried in private journals or family lore. Actively seeking out and sharing these accounts provides a more holistic picture of the human experience during wartime. Imagine a historical documentary that, alongside footage of battles, includes poignant interviews with elderly individuals recounting how a captured enemy soldier shared their meager rations or how a medic from the opposing side ensured their safe passage. Such inclusions enrich the historical record, demonstrating that even within the vast machinery of war, individual agency and the capacity for moral choice remained potent forces. This approach prevents history from becoming a monolithic narrative of destruction, instead highlighting the persistent threads of human connection. Conversely, the subtle erosion of ingrained animosity, even on a small scale, can have long-term implications for societal healing. When individuals witness or participate in acts of kindness towards the enemy, it can challenge deeply held prejudices. This isn't about immediate forgiveness or the cessation of hostilities, but about the gradual chipping away at the psychological barriers that sustain conflict. Think of a community that, years after a bitter war, discovers that a beloved local figure, now a respected elder, once shared a clandestine moment of respite with an enemy combatant during a ceasefire. This revelation, while perhaps initially surprising, can humanize the past, fostering a more nuanced understanding of the conflict and paving the way for genuine reconciliation. It demonstrates that the seeds of peace can be sown even in the most hostile environments, often through the quiet actions of ordinary individuals. Another crucial layer to consider is the philosophical underpinning of such altruistic acts. They speak to a belief in inherent human worth that transcends political or nationalistic divides. The nurse who left the note, "Forgive me," was not only acknowledging a breach of wartime protocol, but was also implicitly recognizing the shared humanity of the soldier she aided. This act suggests a moral framework that prioritizes universal ethical principles over contingent loyalties. Now, consider how this applies when you face deeply ingrained societal divisions. By actively seeking out and amplifying narratives that highlight shared values and common human experiences, rather than focusing solely on points of contention. This approach leverages the power of empathy to bridge divides, demonstrating that recognizing our shared vulnerabilities and aspirations can be a powerful catalyst for healing and understanding, even after profound conflict. These stories, therefore, offer not just historical accounts, but enduring philosophical lessons about the resilience of the human spirit. The pervasive atmosphere of wartime often fosters a phenomenon known as moral contagion, where the normalization of aggression can subtly influence individual behavior, making acts of cruelty seem permissible, even expected. However, the inverse can also occur. When an act of exceptional kindness or empathy breaks through this hardened facade, it can create a powerful counter-contagion. Imagine a situation where a captured enemy soldier, instead of being subjected to the usual harsh interrogations or indignities, is treated with unexpected civility by their captors, perhaps offered a warm drink or a moment of quiet conversation. This deviation from the norm, witnessed by others within the captor unit, can plant a seed of doubt regarding the enemy's supposed inherent malevolence. Consequently, subsequent interactions, even those still within the framework of captivity, might be subtly altered, manifesting in a less brutal or more humane approach. This ripple effect underscores how individual deviations from the expected pattern of hostility can, over time, begin to recalibrate the collective moral compass within a group. Furthermore, the philosophical implications of these wartime acts of compassion extend to the very definition of ethical duty. In the extreme context of war, traditional ethical frameworks, often rooted in loyalty to one's nation or comrades, are severely tested. The emergence of empathy towards an enemy suggests the operation of a higher-order ethical principle, one that recognizes a universal moral obligation transcending national boundaries. Consider the ethical dilemma faced by a medic tending to both their own wounded and enemy casualties. While military regulations might prioritize the care of their own soldiers, a deeply ingrained ethical commitment to preserving life, regardless of affiliation, can compel a different course of action. This prioritization of a universal duty of care over a conditional nationalistic one highlights a profound moral autonomy, demonstrating that individuals can and do operate according to a personal ethical code even when it conflicts with prevailing wartime directives. The practical application of understanding these dynamics lies in the realm of post-conflict reconciliation and transitional justice. Recognizing that individuals capable of empathy exist even within the most brutal conflicts provides a crucial foundation for rebuilding trust. Instead of solely focusing on the mechanisms of punishment or retribution, initiatives can also be designed to identify and empower those individuals who demonstrated a capacity for cross-enemy understanding during the war. For instance, in a community seeking to heal after a period of intense civil strife, community leaders might highlight stories of individuals who maintained dialogue or offered aid to those on the opposing side. Amplifying these narratives can serve to humanize the other and demonstrate that coexistence, even after deep division, is not only possible, but has historical precedent within their own shared past. This focus on shared humanity, rather than solely on past grievances, can be a powerful tool for fostering genuine reconciliation. Conversely, the deliberate suppression of empathy through propaganda serves as a critical mechanism for sustaining prolonged conflict. When the narrative consistently portrays the enemy as inherently evil, devoid of human qualities, it effectively enigments the population against any feelings of compassion or shared understanding. This manufactured perception makes it psychologically easier for individuals to engage in violence, as it removes the cognitive dissonance that would arise from harming someone perceived as fundamentally human. Now consider how this applies when you encounter deeply polarized societal debates today. The systematic dehumanization of opposing viewpoints, often amplified through media or political rhetoric, serves a similar function to wartime propaganda, making constructive dialogue and compromise exceedingly difficult by framing the other as fundamentally misguided or malicious. Recognizing this tactic is the first step in resisting its influence and seeking common ground. Another crucial layer to explore is the role of unexpected proximity in fostering these moments of empathy. Often, acts of kindness occur not in grand, orchestrated encounters, but in brief, almost accidental moments of shared vulnerability. Imagine a pilot from opposing forces finding themselves stranded in the same remote, inhospitable terrain after separate incidents. The shared struggle for survival against the elements, the mutual need for resources, or the simple act of recognizing another human being in distress can override ingrained animosity. Such proximity strips away the abstract labels of enemy and ally, revealing the fundamental shared human condition. These encounters, though often fleeting and undocumented, underscore that the potential for connection can be unlocked when individuals are placed in situations where their shared humanity, rather than their political affiliations, becomes the dominant reality. These moments serve as potent reminders that the foundations for peace can sometimes be laid in the most unlikely of circumstances, through the simple, unscripted interactions of individuals stripped bare of their wartime roles. The insidious nature of wartime propaganda often operates by creating a stark, almost binary division between us and them. This psychological framing is meticulously designed to strip the enemy of their individuality, reducing them to a monolithic entity characterized by malice and depravity. This process of dehumanization is not merely a rhetorical flourish, it is a fundamental prerequisite for sustained, large-scale conflict. When the other is perceived as less than human, the moral barriers to inflicting harm are significantly lowered. Consequently, acts of cruelty that would be unthinkable in civilian life become permissible, even laudable, on the battlefield. This manufactured perception allows soldiers to distance themselves from the consequences of their actions, fostering a sense of moral detachment that is crucial for maintaining combat effectiveness. However, the very effectiveness of this propaganda can, paradoxically, make genuine acts of compassion even more striking. When the carefully constructed illusion of the enemy's subhuman status is shattered by a simple act of kindness, it forces a profound cognitive reevaluation. Consider the impact of prolonged exposure to such dehumanizing narratives on the individual psyche. It can lead to a state of heightened vigilance and suspicion, where every interaction with the perceived enemy is filtered through a lens of ingrained hostility. This constant state of alert, coupled with the expectation of malevolence, makes it incredibly difficult for empathy to surface. The neural pathways that would typically facilitate understanding and connection are, in effect, suppressed or rerouted. Therefore, any instance where an individual consciously overrides this ingrained response, choosing to offer aid, share resources, or engage in a moment of shared humanity, represents a significant act of psychological defiance. It is a deliberate choice to see beyond the manufactured labels and recognize the shared vulnerability that binds all humans, regardless of their uniform. The application of this understanding becomes particularly relevant when addressing deep-seated societal divisions in the present day. When political discourse or media narratives consistently portray opposing groups as inherently flawed or dangerous, they are, in essence, employing a similar strategy of dehumanization. This tactic makes constructive dialogue and compromise exceedingly difficult, as it fosters an environment where the other is not seen as a fellow citizen with differing views, but as an existential threat. Now, think about how you can actively resist this trend by consciously seeking out and engaging with diverse perspectives, by questioning simplistic narratives that demonize entire groups, and by actively looking for common ground. Even in the midst of disagreement, you can begin to dismantle these artificial barriers. This active engagement with complexity, rather than succumbing to binary thinking, is essential for fostering a more tolerant and understanding society. Conversely, the subtle erosion of ingrained animosity, even on a small scale, can have long-term implications for societal healing. When individuals witness or participate in acts of kindness towards the enemy, it can challenge deeply held prejudices. This isn't about immediate forgiveness or the cessation of hostilities, but about the gradual chipping away at the psychological barriers that sustain conflict. Imagine a community that years after a bitter war discovers that a respected elder once shared a clandestine moment of respite with an enemy combatant during a ceasefire. This revelation, while perhaps initially surprising, can humanize the past, fostering a more nuanced understanding of the conflict and paving the way for genuine reconciliation. It demonstrates that the seeds of peace can be sown even in the most hostile environments, often through the quiet actions of ordinary individuals. Another crucial layer to explore is the role of unexpected proximity in fostering these moments of empathy. Often, acts of kindness occur not in grand, orchestrated encounters, but in brief, almost accidental moments of shared vulnerability. Imagine a pilot from opposing forces finding themselves stranded in the same remote, inhospitable terrain after separate incidents. The shared struggle for survival against the elements, the mutual need for resources, or the simple act of recognizing another human being in distress can override ingrained animosity. These encounters, though often fleeting and undocumented, underscore that the potential for connection can be unlocked when individuals are placed in situations where their shared humanity, rather than their political affiliations, becomes the dominant reality. These moments serve as potent reminders that the foundations for peace can sometimes be laid in the most unlikely of circumstances, through the simple, unscripted interactions of individuals stripped bare of their wartime roles. The psychological toll of war is often measured in the visible scars of combat, the physical wounds that tell a story of survival. Yet, beneath the surface, a different kind of injury festers. The moral injury sustained when individuals are forced to act against their deeply held ethical principles. In the crucible of conflict, soldiers may be compelled to participate in actions that violate their conscience, leading to profound internal conflict, guilt, and a sense of betrayal. However, the inverse also holds true. When individuals actively choose to act in accordance with their moral compass, even when it defies wartime norms, the experience can foster a unique form of psychological resilience. The act of extending compassion to an enemy, therefore, is not merely an act of kindness. It is often a powerful affirmation of one's own moral integrity in the face of overwhelming pressure to compromise it. This internal validation can provide a crucial source of strength, enabling individuals to navigate the psychological complexities of war with a greater sense of self-worth and purpose, even amidst the surrounding chaos and brutality. Furthermore, the preservation of these acts of empathy and personal narratives offers a vital counterpoint to the often unidirectional accounts of wartime aggression. While official histories meticulously document battles and casualties, the intimate details of individual moral choices frequently remain buried in private correspondence or unspoken memories. When these personal testimonies are brought to light, They reveal a more complex and humanized picture of conflict. Consider a soldier's letter describing a moment of shared humanity with a captured enemy, perhaps a brief exchange about their families or homeland. Such accounts, though seemingly minor, challenge the monolithic narrative of absolute enmity and introduce the crucial element of individual agency into historical understanding. This preservation of personal moral narratives is essential for a holistic comprehension of war, acknowledging that individuals retain the capacity for ethical decision-making even when stripped of their usual societal frameworks. The practical implications for fostering reconciliation in post-conflict societies are substantial. Understanding that individuals can transcend deeply ingrained animosities provides a crucial psychological framework for rebuilding trust. Instead of solely focusing on punitive measures, initiatives can be developed to identify and empower individuals who demonstrated a capacity for cross-enemy understanding during the conflict. For instance, community dialogues could be facilitated by elders who recall instances of cooperation or shared humanity between former adversaries. Amplifying these narratives can serve to humanize the other and demonstrate that coexistence, even after profound division, has historical precedent within their own shared past. This focus on shared human experiences, rather than solely on past grievances, can be a powerful tool for fostering genuine reconciliation and preventing the perpetuation of cycles of violence. Conversely, the deliberate suppression of empathy through propaganda serves as a critical mechanism for sustaining prolonged conflict. When the narrative consistently portrays the enemy as inherently evil, devoid of human qualities, it effectively inoculates the population against any feelings of compassion or shared understanding. This manufactured perception makes it psychologically easier for individuals to engage in violence, as it removes the cognitive dissonance that would arise from harming someone perceived as fundamentally human. Now think about how you can actively resist this trend in contemporary societal divisions. By consciously seeking out and engaging with diverse perspectives, by questioning simplistic narratives that demonize entire groups, and by actively looking for common ground, even in the midst of disagreement, you can begin to dismantle these artificial barriers. This active engagement with complexity, rather than succumbing to binary thinking, is essential for fostering a more tolerant and understanding society. Another crucial layer to explore is the role of unexpected proximity in fostering these moments of empathy. Often, acts of kindness occur not in grand, orchestrated encounters, but in brief, almost accidental moments of shared vulnerability. Imagine a pilot from opposing forces finding themselves stranded in the same remote, inhospitable terrain after separate incidents. The shared struggle for survival against the elements, the mutual need for resources, or the simple act of recognizing another human being in distress can override ingrained animosity. These encounters, though often fleeting and undocumented, underscore that the potential for connection can be unlocked when individuals are placed in situations where their shared humanity, rather than their political affiliations, becomes the dominant reality. These moments serve as potent reminders that the foundations for peace can sometimes be laid in the most unlikely of circumstances, through the simple, unscripted interactions of individuals stripped bare of their wartime roles. The phenomenon of moral licensing offers a compelling lens through which to understand certain acts of wartime compassion. This psychological principle suggests that after performing a morally good act, individuals may feel they have earned moral credits, which then makes them more likely to engage in subsequent questionable or even immoral behavior. In the context of war, this could manifest in complex ways. For instance, a soldier who has performed an act of extraordinary kindness towards an enemy, perhaps sharing their rations or tending to a wound, might, in a subsequent encounter, feel psychologically licensed to engage in more ruthless behavior, rationalizing it as a consequence of having already proven their inherent goodness. This doesn't negate the initial act of compassion, but adds a layer of psychological complexity, suggesting that the moral landscape of war is not always a straightforward progression towards greater humanity. Consequently, understanding this phenomenon allows us to appreciate that even seemingly positive deviations from wartime brutality can exist alongside, or even enable, other morally compromised actions. Building on this, the concept of in-group favoritism provides further insight into the dynamics of wartime empathy. While we often focus on compassion directed towards the out-group, the enemy. Research consistently shows that individuals are far more likely to extend altruistic behavior towards members of their own group. This is rooted in evolutionary psychology, where cooperation within a group enhances survival prospects. In wartime, this translates to a strong imperative to protect and support fellow soldiers, often at the expense of any consideration for the enemy. Therefore, when acts of compassion do cross enemy lines, they often arise precisely because the individual has momentarily transcended this powerful in-group bias, perhaps by focusing on the universal aspects of suffering rather than the group affiliations. Now, consider how this applies when you face deeply entrenched societal divisions today. Recognizing that genuine connection often requires actively challenging our ingrained tendency to favor our own perceived group, and consciously extending understanding to those outside our immediate circle. This deliberate effort to bridge the us versus them mentality is crucial for dismantling polarization. Furthermore, the impact of these acts on the perpetrator's sense of identity is profound. For individuals who chose compassion in the face of overwhelming pressure to conform to wartime brutality, the experience could fundamentally reshape their self-perception. It wasn't merely about an isolated incident, it was about asserting a core aspect of their identity, their humanity, in a context designed to strip it away. This conscious affirmation of one's moral values, even in the most extreme circumstances, can lead to a strengthened sense of self and a more robust moral compass. Consequently, upon returning to civilian life, these individuals might find themselves more resilient in the face of ethical challenges, their wartime experience having served not as a source of trauma alone, but as a crucible that forged a deeper understanding of their own moral capabilities and limitations. Conversely, the role of uncertainty in wartime interactions often plays a critical part in enabling or inhibiting compassionate responses. When a soldier encounters an enemy, there is inherent uncertainty about their intentions, their capabilities, and the potential consequences of any interaction. This ambiguity can be a breeding ground for fear and hostility, reinforcing the impulse to act aggressively. However, uncertainty can also create openings for compassion. A moment of hesitation, a pause in the expected aggression, can allow for a different kind of assessment, one that might focus on the shared vulnerability of the situation rather than the perceived threat. Imagine a reconnaissance patrol encountering a lone enemy soldier, also seemingly lost or disoriented. The uncertainty of the situation, is this an ambush or a fellow human being in distress, can create a brief window where a more measured, potentially compassionate response becomes possible, shifting the dynamic from immediate conflict to cautious interaction. Another crucial layer to consider is the concept of moral residue. This refers to the lingering psychological and ethical burdens carried by individuals who have participated in or witnessed morally injurious events. In the context of war, this can include guilt over actions taken, or conversely, a profound sense of unease stemming from acts of compassion that violated wartime norms or endangered comrades. For individuals who extended kindness to the enemy, the moral residue might involve grappling with the fact that their actions, while ethically commendable on a human level, were technically transgressions within the military framework. This can lead to a complex internal landscape, where the individual feels ethically validated, yet potentially isolated or even guilt-ridden due to the societal or military implications of their choice. Understanding this moral residue is vital for appreciating the full psychological spectrum of wartime experiences, moving beyond simple narratives of heroism or trauma to acknowledge the intricate ethical burdens individuals carry. Reflecting on this journey through the tempestuous heart of conflict, we find ourselves at a precipice, poised to ascend from the harrowing realities that have unfolded. The intricate tapestry of human experience, woven with threads of both brutal pragmatism and incandescent grace, has been laid bare. We have traversed landscapes where the very foundations of ethical conduct were tested, where the instinct for survival wrestled with an innate, often suppressed capacity for profound connection. The echoes of those moments, the quiet reverberations of choices made under duress, now coalesce, not into a simple summation, but into a more profound understanding of the enduring human spirit. It is as if disparate currents, once flowing in turbulent opposition, are now converging, their combined energy hinting at a powerful, emergent truth that lies just beyond the horizon of our immediate perception. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the subtle yet persistent ways in which the seeds of our shared humanity, sown even in the most barren and hostile grounds, continue to influence the fertile soil of our collective consciousness. These are not mere historical footnotes, but vital affirmations that underscore a fundamental aspect of our being. The insights gleaned from these extraordinary circumstances illuminate the persistent, often underestimated power of individual conscience to navigate even the most overwhelming tides of collective action. It's akin to observing how a single, resilient vine can, over time, find its way through the cracks in the most formidable fortress walls, demonstrating an unwavering persistence that defies the seemingly insurmountable. In light of these insights, the path forward, towards a deeper contemplation of what these historical echoes signify for us today, becomes imbued with a unique clarity. The narrative arc has led us through valleys of despair and across peaks of unexpected redemption, revealing a consistent, albeit often faint luminescence that persevered. The cumulative effect of these explored ideas suggests a profound continuity, a testament to the fact that the capacity for profound ethical choice is not extinguished by circumstance, but rather revealed in its most potent form. We are thus guided towards a vantage point from which the significance of these past events can be more fully apprehended, preparing us for the ultimate message that these enduring echoes carry. The cacophony of war eventually fades, leaving behind a landscape forever altered, scarred yet, remarkably, not entirely devoid of light. We have journeyed through the heart of that tempest, not to dwell solely on its destructive fury, but to seek out the quiet, persistent flickers of humanity that ignited amidst the ashes. These were not grand pronouncements of peace or strategic overtures. They were the intimate, often dangerous choices of individuals who, in a moment's clarity, saw not an enemy, but a fellow soul adrift in the same storm. The nurse who risked her life, leaving behind a plea for forgiveness, embodies this profound paradox, that even in the act of defying the brutal logic of war, an even more ancient and powerful logic, the imperative of compassion, can prevail. Our exploration has revealed that empathy is not a fragile bloom easily crushed by the boots of conflict, but a deep-rooted force capable of surprising resilience. It is the quiet rebellion against dehumanization, the assertion of shared vulnerability in a world that demands division. These moments, though often overshadowed by the thunder of battles and the pronouncements of leaders, are the true echoes of humanity, the enduring whispers that remind us of our interconnectedness. They teach us that even when stripped of comfort, stripped of safety, stripped of the very notion of belonging, the innate human capacity to recognize suffering and extend a hand in kindness remains. This is not a naive idealism, but a hard-won understanding, forged in the fires of experience. What these stories ultimately impress upon us is the extraordinary power inherent in individual choice. In the vast, impersonal machinery of war, where millions are reduced to statistics and ideologies, it is the singular act of moral courage that truly resonates. It is the decision to see the human behind the uniform, to offer solace instead of inflicting harm, that testifies to the indomitable nature of the human spirit. This capacity for grace, for forgiveness, for recognizing the inherent dignity in another, is not a luxury reserved for times of peace. It is a vital force that can, and must, survive the revisions of conflict. The enduring message is not that kindness ends wars, for history shows us the complexity of such endeavors, but that kindness, in its purest form, survives them. It is the thread that, however tenuously, connects us across divides, a testament to our shared journey on this fragile planet. The true practice begins now, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet cultivation of that same spirit within our own lives. It is in recognizing the shared humanity in those with whom we disagree, in extending understanding when division seems easier, in choosing connection over alienation. For the echoes of humanity are not confined to the battlefields of the past. They reside within each of us, waiting to be heard, waiting to be amplified. Let us listen to them, nurture them, and allow them to guide us toward a future where compassion, not conflict, defines our shared narrative. This is the lasting legacy, the profound implication, and the enduring hope that emerges from the heart of even the darkest human struggle.